The message sent at 7:42 p.m. Not to a parent. Not to a teacher. Not to anyone most people would think to call. To the most dangerous phone in the city. Inside Harbolite Cafe, tucked into the last corner booth near the window, a small boy sat completely alone. The kind of alone that doesn't look right on a child. His shoulders were pulled inward. His curly hair fell forward over eyes that had been watching the room for over an hour. A mug of hot chocolate sat beside him. Ordered 40 minutes ago, long gone cold, barely touched. His name was Selim Rivenhart, 6 years old. And he was doing something no 6-year-old should have to do. He was trying to fix his father's life. Hi viewers, have you ever watched a child carry a weight that belonged to the adults around them? Both thumbs moved slowly across the screen. Careful. Like he understood, somewhere in that small chest, that these words mattered. That once they left his hands, something would change. He didn't know what. He just knew that watching his father come home empty and quiet every single night wasn't something he could keep sitting still about. He typed, "Dad works so hard, but his cold boss won't pay him." He stopped, stared at the words, his bottom lip pressed together. Then he pressed send. The contact name at the top of that message thread read simply, Uncle One. 22 floors above the city's downtown core, behind floor-to-ceiling glass walls that reflected the last orange burn of the evening skyline. A private executive meeting was moving into its third hour. The room smelled like leather and quiet money. Every person seated at that table represented hundreds of millions in assets. The agenda on the screen detailed a cross-border acquisition that, if finalized tonight, would restructure 3 separate industries before morning. Nobody in that room interrupted a meeting like this. Nobody even checked a phone. Except one man. Valrik Dreven felt the vibration before he heard it. A single pulse against the table. He didn't look immediately. He was mid-sentence, and Valrik Dreven did not lose his train of thought. But something made him pause. Not anxiety. Not surprise. Just a pull. The kind that doesn't explain itself. He glanced down. Read the message once. The sentence in his chest didn't finish. The temperature in the room didn't drop dramatically. No windows cracked. No lights flickered. It was smaller than that. It was the way Valrik's eyes went completely still. The way his hand, resting flat on the table, slowly closed into a fist without him seeming to notice. His brother Kidron, seated to his left, caught it first. He leaned 2 inches closer. What is it? Valrik turned the screen without a word. Kidron read it. Soren, seated across the table, watched both of them and didn't need to ask. He was already pushing back his chair. The acquisition presentation continued on the screen behind them. Numbers, projections, risk assessments. The consultant at the front of the room kept talking for exactly 4 more seconds before he realized he had lost the entire room. All 3 brothers were standing. No explanation offered. No apology given. The meeting, a billion-dollar negotiation, simply ended. Every person left seated exchanged a look. Because in 11 years of working with the Dreven triplets, nobody had ever seen them walk out of a closing meeting. Not once. Not for anything. One of the junior partners leaned toward the man beside him and whispered the only question anyone in that room was thinking. Who sent that message that made the Dreven triplets leave a meeting like this? Harbolite Cafe had a rhythm to it at night. Not a good one. The kind of rhythm that grinds a person down so slowly they stop noticing it's happening. Orders backed up. Tables turning fast. The kitchen running 3 people short because the manager refused to approve more staffing hours. And in the middle of all of it, moving faster than anyone else on the floor, was Ilian Korveth. 31 years old. Lean in the way that comes from skipping meals, not from discipline. Dark circles sitting permanent under his eyes. His hands were steady even when the rest of him was running on empty, because steady hands meant fewer mistakes, and fewer mistakes meant keeping the job. He carried 3 trays at once. Not because he was showing off, because there was nobody else. 14 days straight. That was how long Ilian had been coming in. No day off. No sick day. No paycheck. Every time he approached the back office to ask, the manager had a new answer waiting. Payroll delay. Direct deposit processing. The bank was running slow this week. His supervisor at the regional level was handling it. It would clear by Friday, then Monday, then the following Wednesday without fail. Ilian kept coming in anyway, because Selim needed to eat. The manager's name was Darren Vexley. He occupied the back office the way a bad smell occupies a small room. Constantly present, impossible to ignore, never taking responsibility for itself. Cheap gold watch on his wrist. Hair pressed flat with something that smelled like synthetic coconut. A laugh that came out too fast, too loud, aimed always at his own jokes. He ran the cafe the way certain men run things when nobody above them is paying attention. He ran it for himself. Extra shifts appeared on the schedule without warning. Ilian would come in for a 6-hour shift and leave 11 hours later. No overtime flagged. No paperwork adjusted. When Ilian asked once, politely, carefully, Vexley had slapped him on the back hard enough to sting and said, "That's just how good workers operate, brother. The weak ones clock out on time." Ilian had nodded and gone back to work. He had learned early in life that men like Vexley don't respond to pushback. They escalate. And Ilian had a son waiting in a corner booth right now, and he could not afford to lose this job tonight. So he kept moving. He didn't notice the way Selim had been watching him all evening. The boy had that quiet intensity that some children carry, the kind that comes from paying too close attention to the adult world for too long. He sat in that corner booth and tracked his father with his eyes every time Ilian moved through the room. He watched the way Ilian's shoulders tightened when Vexley appeared at the kitchen door. He watched the way his father apologized for things that weren't his fault. He watched a man who worked with everything he had get treated like he had nothing worth protecting. Selim had seen the fridge at home. He had watched his father pretend to already be full at dinner so that there would be more food on the plate for him. He had heard his father on the phone late at night, voice low and careful, asking a bill company for just 2 more weeks. Kids don't miss those things. They carry them. Then somewhere around 7:30, the kitchen door swung open and Vexley stepped out with one of the line cooks, laughing at something. The sound carried. Selim heard it clearly from the corner booth because the music had cut out for a moment and the room went briefly quiet. What Vexley said between laughs was this: "Quiet workers are the easiest ones to cheat. They never say a word. They just keep showing up." The line cook laughed back. Vexley disappeared into the kitchen again. Selim sat very still. Then he picked up his phone. He already had the message typed. He pressed send. And outside the cafe, through the tall front windows streaked with the evening mist, 3 black luxury sedans rolled to the curb at the exact same time. The Driven name did not travel loudly. It didn't need to. In the 14 years since Valric, Kedron, and Soren Driven had taken control of Obsidian Dominion Holdings, the company had grown from a mid-sized private equity firm into something that financial analysts struggled to categorize cleanly. Too diversified for a single label. Real estate, logistics, international trade frameworks, legal infrastructure across 4 countries. The kind of operation that didn't just exist inside markets, it shaped them. But the name carried a different kind of weight in other circles. The kind that didn't appear in annual reports. When the Driven brothers moved together, physically in the same direction at the same time, it meant exactly one thing to everyone who knew them. Something needed correcting. The convoy didn't announce itself. 3 black sedans moving in quiet formation through downtown traffic. No escorts. No sirens. The brothers didn't operate with that kind of theater. Theater drew attention. They preferred something cleaner, arriving before anyone expected them, moving without noise, and letting the results speak afterward. Inside the lead car, Valric hadn't said much since they left the tower. He didn't need to. His brothers understood the weight of the message the same way he did. Not because they had been told everything, Because they already knew enough. They knew the name attached to that phone number. They knew what that name meant. And they knew, without discussing it, that 14 days without payment wasn't an accounting error. It was a choice someone made. Behind the sedans, a separate process had already begun. Kedron had made 2 calls before the elevator reached the parking level. One to their private financial investigator. One to the legal team that handled quiet operations. By the time the cars pulled onto the street, requests were already moving through a network most people didn't know existed. Bank logs, payroll records, corporate ownership chains, employment contracts, the kind of information that takes most people months to gather. The Dreven brothers had it in under 30 minutes. Meanwhile, inside Harbourlight Cafe, the night was getting harder. A table of 8 had come in 20 minutes before close. Ilian had been managing them alone after another server clocked out early, approved by Vexley without telling Ilian first. He was moving between the large table and the kitchen, carrying plates that were too hot to hold properly, when his hand caught the edge of the pass-through and the skin across his palm split open clean. Not deep, but sharp. He pressed his hand against his apron and kept moving. Vexley came out of the back and saw the blood seeping through the cloth. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. "Don't bleed on the plates," he said, and walked back inside. That was it. No first aid kit offered. No offer to pull someone else in. No basic human acknowledgement that the man bleeding in front of him was a person who deserved a 2-minute break. From the corner booth, Selim saw all of it. His small hands curled around the edge of the table. He had already sent the message. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if anyone would even come. He just knew he had done the only thing he could think of, and now all he could do was wait. The cafe was thinning out. A few tables finishing drinks. The couple near the door pulling on their coats. The background noise dropping lower by degrees. And in that quiet, a different kind of attention settled over the room, the particular stillness that happens when something is about to change, and the air around it knows before the people do. The front door opened. Not dramatically. No rush of cold wind. No dramatic entrance. Just the door swinging inward on its hinges the way it had 100 times that night. But every single conversation in the room stopped. Immediately. Without reason. Without warning. Just stopped. 3 identical men stepped inside. Nobody in Harbourlight Cafe could have explained, afterward, exactly why the room went quiet the moment those 3 men walked in. It wasn't the suits, though the suits were the kind that don't exist off a rack. It wasn't the way they moved, though they moved with the particular stillness of men who have never needed to rush. It wasn't even that there were 3 of them, identical in build and face and posture, which alone should have drawn more open staring than it did. It was something underneath all of that. Presence. The kind that fills a space before a word gets spoken. The couple by the door went silent mid-laugh. The server near the counter stopped wiping the glass she was holding. The large table of 8, still waiting on dessert, collectively forgot what they had been arguing about. Even the kitchen noise dropped, as if sound itself had decided to give the room over. Valrik Dreven stepped forward. He didn't scan the room nervously. He didn't look around like someone unfamiliar with his surroundings. He looked once. A single, calm sweep, and he found what he came for. His voice, when it came, was not raised. It didn't need to be. "Where is the Omega named Ilian Korveth?" The room held its breath. From behind the serving counter, Ilian looked up. He had been pressing a folded napkin against his palm to slow the bleeding. His first instinct, when he heard his own name spoken in that voice, was to check if he had done something wrong on an order. His second instinct, when he processed the source of the voice, stripped the thought right out of him. He knew that face. He knew all 3 of those faces. 6 years. 6 years of distance, of quiet, of a life deliberately kept small and separate from everything those faces represented. And yet here they stood, inside a cafe that paid him in excuses, looking at him like no time had passed at all. Ilian stepped out from behind the counter. slowly. Sir. His voice came out lower than he intended. Valric's eyes moved from Ilian's face to his hand, to the soaked napkin. He didn't react visibly, but something in the set of his jaw tightened by a degree. He looked at his brothers once. Soren had already shifted his gaze to the back office. Kedron had turned toward the corner booth, toward Selim. The boy was sitting perfectly straight now, both hands flat on the table, his eyes moving between the three men and his father with the careful tracking of a child trying to understand something large. He had been waiting for over an hour. He had sent the message and sat alone and watched his father bleed through a napkin, and now the people he had contacted were actually here, standing in the middle of the room, and the weight of what he had done was only just landing on him. Kedron walked over without hurrying. He lowered himself to one knee beside the booth so that his eyes were level with Selim's. When he spoke, his voice was different from Valric's, quieter, measured in a way that wasn't cold. Did you send the message? Selim didn't answer immediately. He looked at this man. This face he had never seen in person, only saved as a contact name. And he made a decision the way children sometimes do, on pure instinct. He nodded. I didn't want to get my dad in trouble, he said. I just didn't know what else to do. Kedron held his gaze. You didn't cause trouble, he said. You named it. From behind them, the sound of footsteps coming from the back office. Quick, confident. The sound of a man who believed he still had control of the room. Darren Vexley pushed through the kitchen door and stopped when he saw the three men standing in his cafe. His eyes moved across them once. The suits, the bearing, the identical stillness, and his brain immediately began calculating how to handle this. His default was to charm first and deflect second, and he was very good at both. He smiled. Gentlemen. The word came out easy, practiced. Can I help you? We're actually closing up shortly, but I'm sure we can. We're not here for a table. Valric's voice cut across him clean. Not rude, not loud, just final. Vexley's smile held, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. Then what can I? Be quiet, Valric said simply. The smile didn't drop, but it stopped reaching his eyes. He looked between the three of them, then at Ilian, then back. And the calculation in his head was running fast now, because something in the room had shifted completely and he hadn't been the one to shift it, and that was a feeling Darren Vexley was not accustomed to. He pushed his shoulders back. Look, he said. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my cafe and Valric turned to look at him. Fully. For the first time since entering the room. The sentence died. Not because Vexley was told to stop. Not because anyone moved or raised a hand. But because being looked at directly by Valric Dreven, when Valric Dreven had decided he was done being patient, was its own kind of message. Vexley closed his mouth. Valric turned back toward Ilian. His voice dropped back to its natural register. Calm, unhurried, carrying the weight of a man who had already decided how this evening would end. We have questions about your payroll records, he said, and about the person responsible for them. He glanced once toward Vexley, then quietly, the people who decide whether you still have a job tomorrow. The table Valric chose was near the center of the room. Not the back, not a private corner. The center, where every remaining person in the cafe could see exactly what was happening without being able to hear every word. That was deliberate. The Dreven brothers rarely did anything without intention. And placing themselves in clear view of the staff, the remaining customers, and the man sweating in the doorway of his own back office was a specific kind of message. This is not a private conversation. This is a correction, and you will witness it. Ilian sat across from them slowly. He still had the napkin pressed against his hand. He looked like a man trying to understand which version of his life he had woken up in this morning. Kedron set a tablet on the table. Not dramatically. Just placed it down, face up, the way you set down a document you've already read 3 times. 14 days, Kedron said. Not as a question. Ilian nodded once. How many hours per shift, on average? Depends. Ilian's voice was careful. Measured. Scheduled 6 to 8. Actual. He paused. Closer to 11. Sometimes 12. Kedron wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. He was already looking at numbers on the screen that Ilian couldn't see from his angle. Soren, seated to the right, had his phone out. He wasn't scrolling, he was reading. His eyes moved in the focused, lateral way of someone consuming data quickly and storing it accurately. He hadn't said a word since entering the cafe, but the silence around him had weight. The kind of quiet that belongs to someone who is building something, piece by piece, that will land very hard when it's finished. From across the room, Vexley watched. He had tried twice to approach the table. The first time, Valric had not looked up but had raised one hand with a single extended finger, wait, and Vexley had stopped. The second time, one of the security personnel who had quietly entered through the side entrance 15 minutes earlier had simply stepped into his path without making eye contact and said nothing. Vexley had gone back to his doorway. Now he stood there with his arms crossed, watching, recalculating. He told himself he was not afraid. He was afraid. The payroll account linked to this location, Soren said. Without looking up, processed payments for 11 other employees over the past 2 weeks. Standard deposits. On schedule. He set his phone face down on the table. One account was flagged for manual review and held. He looked at Ilian. Yours. Ilian said nothing. The napkin in his hand was fully saturated now. He hadn't noticed. That's not a system delay, Kedron said. No, Soren agreed. It's a manual override. Someone flagged your payment specifically and moved it to a hold queue. The hold requires a management-level authorization code to release. He paused. It's been sitting there for 12 days. The room was very quiet. Most of the remaining customers had stopped pretending not to listen. 2 of the servers, a young woman near the counter and an older man refilling the sugar caddies, had gone completely still. They were exchanging a look that said they had more questions about their own paychecks than they had previously allowed themselves to ask. Valric's eyes moved to them briefly. He filed that away. Vexley pushed off from the doorframe and crossed the room with his hands open and his smile back in place, the one he used when he needed to defuse something publicly. Listen. There may have been a processing error on one account. I can look into. Sit down, Valric said. Not loudly. Not with any heat at all. Vexley sat. He sat the way a person sits when their body responds to authority before their pride catches up. He pulled a chair from a nearby table, positioned it across from the 3 brothers, and sat with his hands on his knees and his jaw set like a man determined to project calm. Kedron turned the tablet to face him. This is your authorization log from the payroll system. 14 days ago, you manually flagged employee number 4471 for review. That employee is Ilian Korveth. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. The system logs show you accessed the hold 3 times and made no action to release it. Would you like to explain what a processing error looks like when a manager visits it 3 times? Vexley's jaw moved. The system doesn't access itself, Soren said. Silence. Vexley's eyes moved to Ilian. Something hot and fast passed through them. Not guilt, not remorse, irritation. The particular irritation of a man who believed he had chosen his target wisely and was now processing the evidence that he had been wrong. I want legal representation before I... Valric's phone was already at his ear. He was looking out toward the front windows of the cafe while he waited for the line to connect. The city moved outside in ordinary amber and white light. Cars. People. A normal Thursday evening that had no idea what was ending in here. The call connected. Release the audit, Valric said. 3 words. Flat. Final. He set the phone face down. Vexley's eyes dropped to the table. Something had shifted in the room again, quietly, completely. Like a door that had been left cracked all evening had just been closed and locked from the outside. He looked at Ilian again. And for the first time all night, Darren Vexley had nothing to say. Vexley's phone went off first. 1 notification, then 3. Then the screen lit up and didn't stop. He pulled it from his pocket slowly, the way a person reaches for something they already know is going to be bad. The first alert was from the corporate banking portal. The second was an automated compliance flag from the hospitality group's regional office. The third was a direct email from the parent company's legal department, time-stamped 40 seconds ago, marked urgent in red. He read the subject line. His face went the color of old concrete. Because Harbolite Cafe was not independent. That was the part most of the staff didn't fully understand. It sat under a hospitality management chain called Meridian Group, 17 locations across 4 states, mid-range dining, nothing glamorous. And Meridian Group had investors, quiet ones, the kind who did not involve themselves in daily operations and expected, in exchange for that distance, that nothing would ever require their involvement. The Dreven name required their involvement. Within 4 minutes of the audit release, the regional director of Meridian Group was on the phone with the legal team. Within 7 minutes, the senior investor liaison had been notified. Within 9 minutes, a name had come up in the investor chain that made 2 people go completely still in their respective offices across 2 different cities. Valrick's name. The call came through to the cafe's back office line at 8:19 p.m. Vexley heard the ringtone from across the room and looked toward the office door. He knew that line. It was the direct line, the one the ownership used. It had rung exactly 3 times in the 4 years he had managed this location. Never at night. Never without warning. He stood up. I need to answer it here, Valrick said. Not a suggestion. Vexley crossed to the front counter, picked up the handset, and said hello with what was left of his composure. The voice on the other end was not warm. The rest of the room couldn't hear the words, but they could hear the tone, clipped, precise, zero patience, cutting through the receiver loud enough that the server standing 6 feet away turned and faced the opposite direction out of instinct. The call lasted 90 seconds. Vexley set the phone down. He stood with his back to the room for a moment, hands flat on the counter. His shoulders had changed shape. Something in the structure of his posture had collapsed inward. Not dramatically, just enough that the person he had been when he walked out of that back office no longer quite existed. He turned around. The staff was watching him. All of them. The servers who had stayed late. The line cook leaning through the kitchen window. Selim in his corner booth. Ilian standing now, still holding the soaked napkin against his hand. Nobody said anything. Vexley looked at Ilian. And then something switched. The calculation left his face and what replaced it was something uglier. The exposed core of a man who had just lost every advantage he thought he held and was looking for somewhere to put the weight of it. This is your fault. His voice came out tight, pointed. You did this. You went behind my back and brought these people into my cafe and now. Stop. 1 word from Soren. Not loud. Not threatening. Just final. The kind of word that lands in a room and closes a door behind it. Vexley stopped. Soren stood slowly. 14 employees at this location received correct payment over the past 2 weeks, he said. 1 did not. The hold was placed manually. The hold was visited 3 times and left in place. He paused. That decision belongs to you, not to him. The room held. The young server near the counter, her name tag read Tamsin, looked from Vexley to Ilian and back again. Something was moving across her face. Recognition, maybe. The slow, cold kind that arrives when you realize something you suspected for a long time just got confirmed out loud. She wasn't the only one. 3 other staff members had gone very still in the way people go still when they are rapidly revising their own histories. Counting back. Recalculating. Remembering delays that were explained away. Overtime that disappeared into the schedule without compensation. Sick days that reappeared as no-call no-shows on records they hadn't been shown. Vexley looked around the room. He read what was on their faces. And he understood, finally and completely, that the problem in this cafe was not Ilian Korveth. It had never been Ilian Korveth. Kedron was already typing 2 emails. One to the regional director confirming the audit scope had expanded to include all employee compensation records for the past 18 months. One to the legal team noting that voluntary cooperation from the manager had not been offered. Vexley's phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. The message was from the Meridian Group owner directly. For words. Don't say anything else. Vexley pulled out a chair and sat down. He set his phone face up on the table and stared at it. The gold watch on his wrist caught the light. It looked different now, not like success, not like authority. Just an object. Sitting on the wrist of a man who had run out of moves. Ilian was still standing near the counter, watching all of it happen, when Vexley turned and looked at him one last time. "This is your fault," he said again. Quieter this time, almost to himself. Ilian didn't answer, because some things don't deserve one. Kedron was the one who crossed the room. Soren stayed at the table, still working. Valric stood near the front windows, phone to his ear, his back half-turned. The cafe had thinned out completely now. The last customers had left quietly sometime during the phone call, reading the room the way people do when they understand they are watching something that doesn't belong to them. Only the staff remained, and Vexley, seated at his table, gone silent, and Selim still in the corner booth. Kedron pulled out the chair across from the boy and sat down in it the same way he had knelt earlier, deliberately low, not towering, level. The kind of positioning that says, "I'm not here to be large. I'm here to listen." Selim watched him sit. "You've been here a while," Kedron said. "Not a question." "Since 6:15, Selim said. "My dad always brings me when he can't get a sitter." Kedron nodded slowly. "You've been watching the whole time." The boy looked at his father across the room. Ilian was standing near the counter, talking quietly with Soren now. The napkin was finally gone from his hand. Tamsin had brought a first aid kit sometime in the last 20 minutes, the one Vexley had never offered, and someone had wrapped the palm properly. He looked tired in the bone-deep way, but he was standing straight, both hands visible, present. Selim looked back at Kedron. "I always watch," he said. "He doesn't know I do. He tries to make it look easy." That landed. Kedron held the boy's gaze. "Did you send the message because you were angry?" Selim thought about it. Genuinely considered the question, the way children do when they take an adult seriously enough to give a real answer. "No," he said. "I was sad. There's a difference." The room somehow got quieter. Kedron leaned forward slightly. "What kind of sad?" "The kind where you watch someone work really hard and nothing gets better." Selim's voice didn't crack. Stayed even. That was somehow more affecting than if it had broken. "He comes home and he eats slow and he doesn't complain. He just goes quiet. And I don't like it when he goes quiet because that means he's carrying something he thinks I can't see." He paused. "I can always see it." The server Tamsin, still standing near the counter, turned her face toward the window. She pressed 2 fingers to her mouth briefly and looked at the streetlights outside. Across the room, Ilian had stopped talking. He was looking at his son. The full weight of what Selim had just said was crossing his face in real time. The slow, devastating arrival of understanding that your child has been reading your pain with more accuracy than you ever meant to give them access to. He hadn't hidden it as well as he thought. He never does. Parents never do. Children always know. He crossed the room. He sat beside his son in the booth, and for a moment he didn't say anything. He just put one arm around those small shoulders and held on. Selim leaned into him without looking up. The automatic lean of a child who has been doing that his whole life, finding the same spot every time because that spot is home. Valric had turned from the window. All 3 brothers, they wait. They tell themselves it will get better on its own. He paused. "Why didn't you wait?" Selim looked up at him. "Because it wasn't getting better," he said simply. "Waiting wasn't working." Nobody argued with that. Ilian tightened his arm around his son. He was looking at the table, not at the brothers, not at the room. His jaw was working the way it does when someone is holding something back. Not tears exactly, but the full recognition of a moment, hitting all at once, that is too large to process in pieces. He turned and looked at Selim. "You shouldn't have called them," he said quietly. "I didn't want you involved in, Dad." The boy said it with such gentle patience. The kind of patience that doesn't belong to a 6-year-old. The kind that gets built in a child who has spent years watching an adult carry too much alone. "I know," Ilian said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." Valric looked at his brothers once. Then he moved a chair and sat down at the table across from them both. When he spoke, his voice had dropped all the way down. No command in it. No authority. Just words. "He protected something real," Valric said. 6 years ago. He didn't have to. He did it anyway. And then he disappeared because he thought his son deserved a life without our shadow in it. He looked at Selim. "He was trying to protect you." Selim turned to his father. Ilian's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. "But his son," Valric continued quietly, "was trying to protect him right back." The room held that. It held it the way a room holds something true, not loudly, not with ceremony. Just settling. Absorbed. The way honest things land when they land fully. Ilian shook his head slowly. His voice came out rough. "You shouldn't have called them," he said again to Selim. Barely a whisper now. And his son looked up at him with those patient, ancient eyes and said, "You never would have." 6 years dissolve fast when the right door opens. Ilian didn't speak for almost a full minute after his son said that. He sat in the corner booth with his arms still around Selim, and the cafe was so quiet now that the hum of the refrigeration unit behind the counter was audible. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, unaware that the room behind that fogged window had just shifted in a way that would not reverse. Valric let the silence hold. He understood it. Some things needed space to breathe before words could move through them. It was Soren who finally broke it. Not abruptly, just a measured opening, the way you ease a door rather than pull it. "We need you to understand something," he said to Ilian. "Not as a correction. Not as a negotiation." He paused. "As a fact." Ilian looked at him. "We knew where you were," Soren said. "The entire time." The refrigeration unit hummed. Ilian's expression didn't change at first. Then something moved through it. Not anger, not surprise. Something more complicated than either. The slow arriving understanding that the distance he had built and maintained for 6 years, the silence, the deliberate smallness of his life, hadn't been the invisible wall he believed it was. "You were watching us," Ilian said, flat. Not quite a question. "Watching over," Valric said. The distinction was quiet but absolute. Ilian let out a breath through his nose. Long and slow. "I left because I didn't want this. Any of it. I didn't want Selim growing up inside. We know." Kedron's voice was even. "We respected that. We kept our distance the way you asked without asking. You built a clean life. You worked honestly. You kept him out of everything that touches us." He held Ilian's gaze. "We didn't interfere. But you watched." "Yes." Ilian looked down at the table. His cleaned hand, now wrapped in white medical tape, rested flat against the surface. He stared at it. "For 6 years," he said. "For 6 years," Valric confirmed. There was a version of this where Ilian got angry, where the revelation that his privacy was never fully real produced something sharp and defensive. The brothers had anticipated that. They had watched enough situations in their lives to understand that the truth, even when it comes from a place of protection, can feel like a cage door swinging open to reveal it was never locked. But Ilian didn't get angry. He sat there and processed it, and the thing that came out the other side wasn't rage. It was exhaustion. The specific, particular exhaustion of a man who had been fighting alone, deliberately, proudly, at real cost, against a version of reality that was always slightly different from the one he thought he was in. 14 days, he said quietly. 14 days without a check. My son is eating half portions so I can pay the light bill. And you were watching. Yes, Valric said. Then why didn't... He stopped himself. His jaw worked. He started again. Why wait for a text message from a 6-year-old? Kedron answered that one. Because you never asked. The simplicity of it hit harder than an explanation. You built a life on handling things yourself, Kedron continued. Every time something went wrong in the past 6 years, you handled it. Quietly. Without calling. Without reaching out. We saw it. He paused. We weren't going to override your choices. That's not respect. Soren added. But when someone in your house asked for help, he glanced at Selim, still tucked under his father's arm, listening to everything with those steady eyes. That was a different signal. Ilian looked at his son. Selim was watching him the way he always watched him, with that careful, patient attention that had been tracking his father's life since before he had words to name what he was seeing. He texted you, Ilian said. Half to them, half to himself. He saved our number 3 years ago, Kedron said. Ilian turned. What? Kedron's expression didn't change. When Selim was 3, you listed us as emergency contacts on a school intake form. You used a number we'd given you years before, one we kept active. A beat. He found it in your contacts. He saved it under his own name. We know because the number pinged our system when it was accessed. Ilian stared at him. He saved us, Kedron said quietly. 3 years before he used us. The corner booth was completely still. Outside, a car went by slowly. Headlights sweeping across the front windows, passing, gone. The cafe settled back into its quiet. Ilian looked at his son one more time. Something in his face, in the lines of it, in the set of his mouth, was different now from what it had been 2 hours ago. The weariness was still there. That doesn't just leave. But underneath it, something else had moved. Like a weight that had been pressing so long it had become invisible, shifting a single inch. Just enough to notice. You shouldn't have had to carry this, he said to Selim. Voice low. The boy tilted his head up and looked at him. Neither should you, Selim said. Valric stood. He buttoned his jacket once, precisely, and looked at Ilian with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who has made a decision and is about to state it plainly. We have something to discuss, he said. About what comes next. Ilian met his eyes. I'm listening. The offer came without ceremony. Valric didn't frame it as a favor. He didn't soften it with preamble. He set his phone on the table, face up, and slid it forward so Ilian could read the screen. The document open on it was a position overview, 2 pages, formatted cleanly, the kind that gets prepared by people who have been waiting to use it. The title at the top read, Financial Oversight Director, Internal Ethics Division, Obsidian Dominion Holdings. Ilian read it once, then again. He didn't reach out and take the phone. He just read it from across the table with both hands flat on the surface, like a man making sure he understood the language before he trusted the meaning. The salary figure was in the second paragraph. He read past it on the first pass. Then he went back. He was quiet for a long time. This isn't what I do anymore, he said. His voice was careful. Not dismissive, careful, the way you handle something that could cut you if you move too fast with it. I left that world for a reason. This isn't that world, Soren said. Ilian looked up. Our financial infrastructure has grown considerably in 6 years, Soren continued. With that growth, we've had exposure points, internal irregularities, accounts handled by people who were technically competent and ethically absent. He kept his voice flat, factual. We've needed someone in an oversight role not to find money, but to protect the integrity of how it moves. Someone who understands the systems from the inside. Someone who will not be persuaded. He paused. We've been looking for that person for 3 years, Kedron added quietly. We stopped looking when you made contact tonight. Ilian shook his head. Not in refusal. In the specific way people shake their heads when they are trying to organize something large in a short amount of time. You're telling me this position has been open for 3 years? Yes. And you're offering it to a man who just finished a double shift carrying trays. We're offering it to the man who, 6 years ago, refused to falsify numbers under direct pressure from people who could have hurt him, and who delivered documentation that collapsed a laundering operation we had spent 8 months trying to locate from the outside. Valric's voice carried no heat, just fact. We know who you are. We're not being charitable. We're being accurate. That landed differently. Charity could be refused. Charity was soft, it implied deficit, implied that the recipient had something less than what they needed. Ilian had spent 6 years refusing charity. He had built an entire identity around not needing it. But accuracy was something else. Still, he sat with it. Selim had been quiet through most of the conversation. He had that particular child's ability to understand when something important was happening and that his job right now was to hold still and let the adults move through it. But his eyes had been on his father the whole time, reading him the way he always read him, catching every small thing. He waited until the silence stretched. Then he asked, "Does this mean you won't have to be sad at work anymore?" The question arrived like something small and blunt-edged, carrying significantly more weight than its shape suggested. Ilian closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. When he opened them, Selim was still watching him with that patient, steady gaze. Not pleading, not pushing, just present. Just asking the only question that actually mattered to him. Not the salary, not the title, not the position's implications inside whatever world these men occupied. Just, will you be okay? Ilian looked at his son for a long time. Then he looked at the 3 men across from him. He had left this life 6 years ago because he believed the safest thing he could give his son was distance from it. Clean edges. A life that didn't have shadows at the border. He had carried that choice through 14-hour shifts and empty fridges and a palm split open by a man who saw quiet people as opportunity. He had carried it here. And his son, 6 years old, watching from a corner booth, reading every line of his father's face, had looked at all of that and decided, quietly and without asking permission, that waiting wasn't working. Ilian turned back to the phone on the table. He looked at the document a 3rd time, slower, not rechecking the numbers, reading the structure of it, the scope, what it actually required, what it would actually allow him to do. He picked up the phone, held it for a moment. Then he set it back down and looked at Valric. 2 conditions, he said. Valric waited. The role stays clean. If I find something wrong inside your organization, I report it the same way I'd report it anywhere. No exceptions. No quiet handling that protects the wrong people. Valric nodded once. Agreed. And Selim doesn't inherit any of this. Whatever world exists around this company, around you, it stays at the office. It doesn't follow us home. Kedron looked at Soren. Soren looked at Valric. The exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. Valric turned back. Agreed. Ilian looked at his son one more time. Selim was watching him. Waiting. Ilian nodded slowly. Not with enthusiasm. Not with relief. With the quiet, deliberate weight of a man making a real decision. One that lands in the body differently than impulse. And Selim, reading him the way he always read him, saw the answer in it before his father said a word. He didn't cheer. He didn't react loudly. He just leaned back into his father's side and let out a breath he had probably been holding since 7:42 p.m. 3 weeks is not a long time. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't smooth over 6 years of running hard on nothing. It doesn't unteach a child to eat carefully or untrain a father to count the hours between paychecks in his sleep. But 3 weeks can move the floor under a life. Quietly, without announcement. Ilian's first day at the new office was a Tuesday. The building was in the financial district, not the glass tower where the triplets held their executive meetings, but a quieter annex 4 blocks east. 12 floors. A corner office on the 9th floor with a window that faced north, where on clear mornings you could see the bay past the rooftops. The desk was clean wood, wide, the kind built for real work. No decorations when he arrived. He hadn't added any yet. He sat down in it and looked at the window for a moment. Then he opened the first file on the system and started reading. The work was real. That part had not been overstated. The Driven financial infrastructure was vast. Not corrupt at the center, but large enough that irregularities could exist in the margins without anyone noticing unless someone was specifically looking. That was the job. Not to protect the brothers from accountability, but to ensure that the systems underneath their operation reflected the same standard they expected at the top. It was, in a strange way, the exact same thing Ilian had done 6 years ago, just with a different address. He understood it immediately. He was good at it immediately. That wasn't vanity. It was just the particular relief of a person who has spent years operating below their actual capacity, finally given room to move at full stride. Harbolite Cafe got new management 12 days after that Thursday night. The Meridian Group moved quickly once the audit completed. Vexley was terminated with cause, and the fraud investigation, which expanded considerably once the employment records for 18 months were fully reviewed, was handed to external attorneys. For other employees had been systematically underpaid. 2 had been having overtime hours erased from their records. Tamsin, the server who had stood silently at the counter that night and turned toward the window, was one of them. The back wages went out in full. No negotiation. The new manager was a woman named Deshonda Marks, 38, 12 years in hospitality, the kind of person who knows every person's name on her team by the end of the first week. She walked in on day 1, sat the entire staff down, and told them that the door to the back office would be open during her shift. Every shift. The staff took 2 or 3 days to believe her. Then they did. Selim started sleeping better. That was the thing Ilian noticed first, before the finances stabilized, before the new routines settled in, before any of the larger changes had time to calcify into something permanent. His son started sleeping through the night without waking. He started finishing his food at dinner without watching Ilian's plate. He started asking the kinds of questions 6-year-olds are supposed to ask. About clouds, about how engines work, about whether fish dream. Questions that don't come from a child carrying weight. Questions that come from a child who has put the weight down. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 weeks in, Valric called ahead. No ambush this time, just a phone call the night before, asking if they could visit. Ilian said yes. He made coffee. He put out a plate of things Selim liked. He was surprised, a little, by how uncomplicated it felt to say yes. All 3 brothers came. They didn't stay long. An hour, maybe. They sat in Ilian's living room, which was small and warm, and had a drawing Selim had made of the 3 of them taped to the refrigerator in the kitchen. And the conversation was ordinary in the way that rare things can be. No business. No updates. Just people who had history sharing space without it pressing on them. Before they left, Valric lingered in the doorway while the other 2 walked out. He looked down at Selim, who was standing beside his father the way he always stood. Close, attentive, taking stock. "I have a question for you," Valric said. Selim looked up at him. "Why did you send the message?" The boy considered it the same way he considered every real question. Fully, without rushing. "Because someone should help when things are unfair," he said. "And nobody else was going to." Valric looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. The way a person nods when something confirms something they already knew but needed to hear said out loud. He looked at Ilian. "He's going to be something," he said quietly. Ilian looked at his son. "He already is," he said. The door closed. Outside, the city moved through its Saturday the way it always did, streets full, ordinary, unglamorous. Somewhere across town, a cafe was being run properly for the first time in years. Somewhere in a glass tower, a financial audit was wrapping its final documentation. Somewhere in a quiet office with a north-facing window, a man's real work had started at last. And in a small living room, a 6-year-old went back to his drawing. Not worried, not watching, just a child. The way it should have been all along. Power doesn't prove itself by taking up space. Real power is what happens when the right person finally stops being small on purpose. And sometimes, the most dangerous message in a city is written by a 6-year-old who simply refused to stay quiet. If this story moved something in you, if you know what it feels like to work hard while someone above you counts on your silence, drop a comment below and tell us your story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you believe that loyalty and honesty should be rewarded, not punished, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because every week on this channel, we bring you stories of real justice, quiet strength, and the people who refuse to stay invisible. The next story is already waiting. Don't miss it.